Now, we have on this program been pointing out the role of the Channel 9 newspapers, specifically the Sydney Morning Herald, in giving soft coverage and endless soft coverage to the fake independents. The fake independents that, put simply, only exist to rob the Liberal Party of seats to be able to form a government. Mathematically, a good chance of one or two of these things happening, making it 1 or 2 seats harder for the government to get anywhere near being able to hold on for another 3 years. Now, these independents get endless soft treatment, but essentially they are a party because they have the same funding model, they have the same T-shirts, they all say the same lines, and they are all effectively backed in by a group called Climate 200. Now, Get Up doesn't seem to be playing at this election, but a billionaire with a lot of money and a cause du jour, which is to make sure the Liberal Party does not get returned to government, well and truly do. That's why I talk about Get Up with Audis and jerks with Mercs being the people who say you should play by the inner city rules when it comes to the government. Now, this is the type of profile that they've done on that billionaire. They often talk about and give free coverage to independents nobody's ever heard of, who at some times were being shopped around as candidates rather than people who just popped up and put their hand up. But it is remarkably effective because of this echo stream. It gets announced in the Sydney Morning Herald, it gets reported in The Guardian, it gets repeated in free advertising on Channel 2, and circle goes round and round again. These are essentially the Twitter candidates. The game is that the Liberal Party would end up getting more votes than them. However, when you put them together with the Labor Party, the Greens and their preferences, well, that's how you end up taking the seats off the Liberal Party. Think about Zali Steggall, who has produced what in 3 years for her electorate? Well, it'll be exactly the same for these people. It's effectively a way of opting out of politics, but making sure that you wrap your arms around nothing but symbolism. Now, again, there are opinion polls which get run by hard left groups with associations to the Greens, who, again, in the Channel 9 newspapers, this time in the Financial Review, constantly pump up their chances at the election. So this grassroots movement that's exactly the same in every single place, that's funded exactly the same way, that all wear the same T-shirts, that all have the same talking points, that even at the last election all said exactly the same thing in a video on YouTube, they're planning to do it again. You know the types of people who are advising them, Oakeshott and Windsor, Julia Banks. These people are literally on the advisory panel, but I wonder if there are several aggrieved former high-profile Liberals who are trying to work this out as the way to screw over the government. Nothing new here. But I do have to give some credit to the Channel 9 newspapers because despite the fact that they have largely cheered on, created and pumped up this movement, they actually told the truth about it today in one of their articles. It is an article about the fundamental lie that is being told to people who think that this group is apparently different than the Liberal Party, different than the Labor Party, better than any other independent group that's ever come before. They're all about transparency. But it proves in this article that there is a huge chunk of money that they are getting that is secret. Put simply, again, into this article today, and it says that a climate foundation with unknown donors, I should say, has become one of the strongest supporters of Climate 200. $304,000 in financial structures similar to those to the associated entities used by major political parties. So put simply, they pretend to not be like anyone else in politics. They're a new broom, but they use the same dirty tactics to hide their money. These people are very smart. They've got big media backing, but credit today to at least one part of the media that was willing to start to show the true falseness of these fake independents. It's why Jane Hume, a Liberal senator, in the same article said this: the greatest hypocrisy of the voices of candidates is that they take money and others have obscured through Mr Holmes Accord's scheme are the ones calling for more transparency in politics. It's all fair. Now, is any of it illegal? Absolutely not. But is any of it different than the people you are supposedly trying to replace? A political system that you wish a revolution upon, which only happens to be one political party that you're going against? This is, of course, a hit job. There are well-funded people who are willing to back it, the types of people who believe that you need to change your life for climate change, but they can buy mansions on either side of Sydney Harbour. This is the reality. It is the people with the most money in the bank who want to tell you how to live. Now, of course, if you don't live in one of the electorates in the inner city of Sydney and Melbourne that are frankly being focused here, it's going to be difficult. But it does sharpen your choices that if they lose one in the city, then maybe they can pick one up where you live. Your vote matters as much in rejecting this movement as it will be for those who seek to hide their vote behind people who will not be able to achieve things for their electorate. They won't be in opposition. They won't be in government. They will just be on the ABC all day, every day, telling you why you're awful. And on part of the cons being pushed at this election, without doubt, in my view, one of the greatest is the one that Albo is trying to put when it comes to climate. As you know, he wants 43% emissions reduction by 2030. That's just 2 points off where Bill Shorten was. So it's the dodgy version of the Shorten scheme that was rejected at all points around the country. And not believing that the issue was the problem, just the messaging, just the wrapping that it came in, Albo is taking Bill Shorten's climate policy but pretending that there's lots of jobs and then there are wind farms.
Our Powering Australia plan will reduce Australia's emissions by 43% by 2030, putting us on track for net zero by 2050. It's a plan with economic growth at its heart. Over 600,000 jobs created.
600,000 jobs. Now, all of that is if, buts and maybes. Apparently, magically, people will be hired by their hundreds of thousands because the grand total of apparent savings to power prices is $275 a year per house by 2025. If anyone's had to hire a tradie recently, you know that wouldn't even get them out for 2 hours work, let alone fund 600,000 new jobs. And there are brave people in the press gallery, who often I will attack, and quite gladly so, because we've seen their efforts in the past few days, but they will actually give the tough questions to the bloke that the rest of the media is trying to wave through. Greg Brown at the National Press Club. He works for The Australian.
Former ACTU President and Labor MP Jenny George says she thinks the predicted jobs growth under the modelling for your plan is quite unbelievable, given that just 64,000 of those jobs will be directly created from your policies.
So that's the reality. Even a hardcore former leader of the ACTU, remember that far right-wing think tank, the ACTU, Jenny George, says it's garbage, it's fanciful, it's not true. But he continues to peddle this lie because there is such resistance to anyone actually pulling apart the detail. Well, amazingly, there are people who try to produce, well, in my view, rather obviously biased opinion polls that try to pretend that Australians are absolutely desperate for this change when it comes to where we get our power from, how we power our manufacturing sector, what we are able to export to the rest of the world, what ends up paying for schools and hospitals at the state level. Perfect example, the Union Super newsletter website, The New Daily, well, they were very excited today that voters in coal and gas heartlands are ready to cash in on a clean energy future. The only problem is, guess who did the poll? The Climate Council. Now, in the same way that you would dismiss an opinion poll from any other interest group, how can you not dismiss something that's released by an advocacy group like the Climate Council? Well, again, while they don't show us the methodology, they don't give us any greater details, we just have to trust their press release. This was the apparent findings of that particular opinion poll. It suggested that people's future prosperity that would be linked to coal and gas is just 26% of knuckle draggers in Queensland and cave-dwelling 21% of morons in New South Wales. Because apparently the future prosperity from renewables is embraced by 63% of Queenslanders and 68% of people in New South Wales. In fact, even in their little press release, there was the in-house economist for the Climate Council who said this: "This polling reveals that people in New South Wales and Queensland understand the era of coal and gas in this country is coming to a close as the world rapidly decarbonises." I can add a few lines to that, including with one rather large exception: China, China, China. Remember, they can continue to do whatever they want till 2030, and at their tippy top of 2030 is when they get judged. In the meantime, people like Albanese say that we have to tie half of our country's economy behind its back to make sure that we can get the Bill Shorten dream that Australians rejected in 2019. Now, I'm relentless about this because no one else will talk about it, but you will pay. Now, even if miraculously, somehow, your power bill in a couple of years' time, in 3 years' time, falls to $275, the actual cost of the change to the electricity network alone is $1 trillion. Labor is promising to put just $20 billion toward that process. So who's going to pay? Well, maybe it'll be private companies. Do you think private companies will not pass on $980 billion worth of costs to you, the customer? That's exactly why Jenny George says that this is rubbish. And amazingly, while I am surprised by the Channel 9 papers, I have to say too, taxpayer internet filters, well, they weren't quite working because some truth was able to come up on the Channel 2 website suggesting that decarbonising the economy could lead to hundreds of thousands of job losses. Hang on, I thought it was 600,000 new jobs that fall from the sky. Actually, 64,000, maybe not long-term jobs. So the only thing I care about in this issue is not whether we have to do something about climate change. Of course, you can't have 7 billion people on the planet and rising and have problems with our environment, but it is not a level playing field. China can replace everything Australia does in just 16 days. Yet an incoming Labor government wants to pretend that 600,000 jobs are going to fall from the sky, but the ABC will tell us up front that hundreds of thousands of jobs could disappear. The only thing that ever matters to Australians is the cost of transition. That's why Labor's trying to pretend that the cost of transition is all up with hundreds of thousands of jobs and $275 in 3 years, maybe. The polling, that has never changed. Before or after Net Zero 2050, before or after Albo's policy, before or after Bill Shorten was given the backside 3 years ago. Australians won't pay for it. Because we can't be simultaneously told that the cost of living is a vital issue at the election, but don't worry about the cost of transition when it comes to technologies or the industries of people who are in those jobs to make sure that manufacturing, mining and the rest of it can continue to surge like it currently does. This was polling that was done by YouGov. You would have seen it both before last year and again this year, that 46% of Australians are willing to pay nothing. In order to have an impact on climate change, if it meant an increase in your cost of living, how much are you willing to pay? 46%, zero. 27%, $300. $600, 11%. Just 4% of people say $1,200 a year. Ironically, 4% is exactly the number of people who listen to Radio National in Sydney and Melbourne every single day. Those are the people with houses on both sides of the harbour who say, bugger you, we can afford to pay. Who cares if you can't? That is the reality yet again. This election is about choices. Nothing is inevitable. I don't believe that people have already made their mind up, because when you actually know what's coming, I think there's very much a case for a second look at making sure that we do not change the course we are currently on.